Hello, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces, some new faces, and well, so many of you really, because yeah, this is Green Tech Southwest, but it is also our 50th ever event. Thank you very much. I wasn't going to pause for that, but yeah. And also it's our last event of the year, which is a nice bit of rounded finalness, which I like. So yeah, thank you so much for spending the evening with us. We're really looking forward to it. We've got some anniversary, but I don't think we'd be looking like this after that many events. But yeah, we're really excited to have Ollie and James from Scott Logic, who kindly lend us the space as well, and Joanne from Bristol Waste. So yeah, really great event in store for you today. Just want to say always a big thanks to our sponsors. We've got AdLib and we've got Bristol Digital Futures Institute. Without them we couldn't put on the event. And then also, of course, Scott Logic for letting us completely rearrange their common room every month or so. So yeah, you'll probably have seen our faces floating around. We're your co-founders. I'm Ellen, and then we've got Hannah and Mike dotting around as well. So yeah, come say hi at some point after the event. But yeah, not nothing about us. We also got a fantastic team of volunteers behind us who keep us calm and just really help us put these events together. We've got Sam who is shy and hides behind the monitor, but he makes sure that all these events are digitized. We've got Tegan who's not here today, but she usually does help us dot around. And then we've got John as well. You've seen him on the way in, and then Tim as well over there. Thank you guys. It really does help keep us calm. So yeah, talking of digitizing the events, so yeah, we always record our events so that you can watch the events back, share them with your colleagues, friends, or anyone who might be interested. So after this event, we'll make sure the recording's up and any information that gets shared throughout the event that might be relevant. So do check us out on greentechsouthwest.org. All of our past events are there. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile visit. I'll make sure the link's in our meetup page. So yes, we are Green Tech Southwest and we do have speakers today, but we also want to make sure that our community has the opportunity to share things with the community that might be of interest, whether you've got a humble brag or you've got a project that you're working on that you might want to share or get help involvement with. This is your opportunity to come take this microphone and just give it a shout out for 60 seconds. We're not too strict, don't worry. So if anyone does have something they'd like to say or like to share with the community, you can put your hand up. Oh, Hannah, lovely. Kicking off with the best here. Oh, I forgot to mention the cake.
Yeah. This is a bit of a cheat. It's not really a community 60-second intro. I just want to make sure everybody's seen the cake. This is our 50th meetup and Mike went to great lengths to get us a cake made and I'm about to cut it up. Did you all see it? Excellent. All right. Well, this will be available to everyone in the break. Thank you so much for coming. And now we can do real 60-second intros.
Do you know, the whole way here, I was like, mention the cake. And then the minute I got here, I didn't mention the cake. I don't want to draw attention to it so I can have it all. But yeah, has anyone got something? Absolutely no pressure. But if anyone has a 60-second intro, now is your moment. Yes, amazing. Yes, there's always one to start off. And you get extra props for being the first one. Let us know your name.
Yep. Hi, evening everyone. My name's Fadl Issa. It's my second time here. I came last time as part of Bristol Tech Fest. I just want to spotlight a resource for everyone to be aware of, and that's the fact that there is carbon literacy training available if people are interested. I know this is a green tech event, just to help people get a bit more aware of their carbon footprint, ways that we can contribute to reducing greenhouse gases and warming and things you can do around transport and the built environment. And obviously we're talking about tech here today as well. I was on the carbon literacy training today. It was really, really good. So yeah, just wanted to highlight that that's something that's available for people who might be interested in it. That's it from me.
Thank you so much. I'll grab the details of where people can find the information off you, and I'll make sure that's widely available. But amazing. Thank you so much. With that shining example, anyone else got anything they'd like to share? Or yes, amazing. I knew it would work.
Hi, my name is Mark, and kind of building off what Charette Adel Fadel just said. Thinking about transport, I'm thinking about how to encourage people to walk more, because I think it's the lowest carbon footprint is walking versus driving. Like, any help for that? One of the things I've got is that if I want to make sure I'm on time somewhere, walking is usually the best way. Because when you're driving, you have no idea if there's gonna be traffic, it's gonna be construction, like roadworks outside. It's ridiculous outside this building. But getting here on foot, like, you got a standing chance. You could always run if you're running late. But in a car, you're like, I can't run through traffic. And then when you get there, what do you do with the car? Parking takes a long time as well. So any advice or any ideas for how to encourage people walking to be more green? Because like transport, the car is the worst, and it's bad for timing too. So that's it. 6 seconds.
Thanks very much, Mark. A little bit of motivational walking, especially in this weather. Get outside, yeah. Amazing. Well, if I've bullied enough people, I think, to come up here, I think we'll get on with the today's event. But yes, a little bit, because obviously we want to keep these events community focused. We like to hear praise, but we also are very open to criticism. So if there's any suggestions or if there's anything that we can do better or differently, please do let us know at greentechsw@gmail.com. But you can also be nice. So yeah, without further ado, I'm taking it over to James and Oliver from Scott Logic. If you come in, or no? Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much.
See back, see grab as well.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I was
Right.
just need to faff around with a couple of things here. Just turn the camera at the back. Let's turn this on. 2 seconds. Cool. Well, I didn't do a 60-second intro like I'm probably becoming famous for, because that's obviously when I get a chance to talk about Scott Logic. So I will briefly tell you about Scott Logic for those of you who don't know, but it's great to see so many of you returning to the event. Scott Logic is a B Corporation software and data engineering consultancy. We are 20 years old this year. We're still founder owned, proudly founder owned by Gary Scott, hence Scott Logic, who actually comes from the northeast of England. And he created Scott Logic really as a social enterprise because he didn't feel that there was enough employment opportunities for technologists in the northeast of England. So that's where we started our story. Then we expanded into Scotland, into an Edinburgh office, and Bristol not long after that. And those are the three main offices. So Newcastle's still our biggest office, but the other two offices, the Edinburgh office is about the same size as this one. And then we have Glasgow and Leeds as small offices and a small presence in London because a lot of our clients are London-based. Most of our clients are big banks, financial services firms, public sector, central government, devolved government, and also a bit of energy and private equity as well. So that's a little bit about Scott Logic. I don't want to major on that, but just gives you a little bit of a flavour of who we are. So let me switch to my slides. That would probably be helpful. So where's my mouse gone? So the topic that James and I are going to talk about is striving for more sustainable and greener AI. And this is a topic we've spent quite a bit of work on. And in fact, I'll get Ellen to wave her hand because Ellen's also part of the team that's been helping us with this work as well. And so there's a small sort of crack team within Scott Logic that's looking at tech sustainability. And we also do our best to weave tech sustainability thinking into all the work we do. So we're going to talk a little bit about why this matters. I think we don't need to dwell on that one. I think a lot of people probably get that, but we'll recap that. We're going to talk about the sort of perception versus reality, because I think there's a fair amount of bubble bursting that we need to do. James is going to talk a bit about the research and the insights from some of the research he's been doing. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some strategies for more sustainable AI. I have to say, we don't have a huge amount of time tonight, but we've got a lot to cover. So I apologize in advance. It's going to be a bit of a matrix mind upload. We're going to go quite quickly. Sorry about that. And it's probably not only going to scratch the surface. So, but it will be a bit of a journey, right? We are going to paint some uncomfortable realities around some of the current situation, but we're aiming to leave you more hopeful that there are opportunities to do things better. We just need to, take sometimes the harder path rather than the easy path. So that's probably one of the key messages to sort of think about later. So before we get into that, a little bit about me. So I started off in computer science sort of background, always fascinated by technology, but also fascinated by science. It was a really difficult decision for me which sort of career direction to take. Used to be a developer. Many years of my career I spent a developer. I spent a fair amount of time at energy and environmental consultancy, which is where I got my grounding in things like life cycle analysis, greenhouse gas emissions factors, all that sort of lovely stuff. Then when I worked in the energy sector, and then various other organizations. 6 years ago, I started something called Architect Tomorrow, which is a podcast talking about how we can imagine a better future with better technologies. And then 3 years ago, I joined Scott Logic, and I lead sustainable technology as well as our R&D. My main day job is R&D, and sustainable technology slots in within that. James and myself and other colleagues are the co-authors of something called the Tech Carbon Standard, which I'll talk a bit more about later, which is an open source project, very open, designed to be, something we just put out there with very permissive open source licensing for people to understand the technology landscape and how carbon emissions, result as a result of technology usage. And like I say, I'll come on to that in a minute. And amazingly, from doing a talk 3 years ago talking about tech sustainability, somehow now I'm speaking globally about this topic. So I've done a couple of talks in the States, but not this year. I tried not to do transatlantic travel this year, but I did 2 talks in the States on this topic. I've done talks around Europe, and the picture I want, slight bagging rights, is a couple of weeks ago I was actually asked by Treasury to speak at Treasury about this very topic I'm about to talk to you about. So I'm going to give you a very distilled version of some of the Treasury messages. There is a 20-minute or so version of the talk that I can put you out on YouTube if you want to see the full version, because like I say, I'm going to have to summarize in interests of time. James.
Hello. Can anyone hear me? Yep. So I'm James Camilleri. I'm a lead developer here at Scott Logic. I've only been doing sustainability stuff for about the last 2 years. And I describe myself as an IT generalist because my career has spanned more than just software development. I started off, God, I'm going to feel old now, doing technical support for dial-up modems back at the turn of the millennium. And from there went into sysadmin, and most of my career has been in as a dev. As Ollie said, I contribute to the Tech Carbon Standard, and I've also published a few blogs about sustainability on the Scott Logic blog, so take a look if you like.
Thanks, James. So, whoops. Sometimes hard to get the distance from your mouth correct, isn't it, with these things? So apologies for that. So yeah, we're going to talk about, as I say, the perceptions, and I think the key thing I try and talk about with this space is I don't want to be like a doomer. I also don't want to be like a hyper. I try and be like a pragmatic person in the middle. There's genuine excitement and amazing opportunities from a lot of the technologies we're all seeing, but there are some harsh realities that I think we all need to be more aware of and educating and raising awareness of. And so sort of both things can be true, right? It can be, there can be some amazing opportunities for sustainability and tools for efficiency, but there's also some serious challenges. And, we need to be quite honest and burst some of the hype. And on that, I want to just use sort of one of my main analogies for talking about this space, which is there's a lot of comparisons to the current AI build out to railway investment, right? I don't know if anyone's sort of heard that comparison, but there's lots of sort of comparisons made. Like, this is like building out the next railway type infrastructure. And I wanted to sort of look at that analogy and sort of slightly pick it apart. Because I think there is this sort of air of inevitability. We just like need to get on the train, and we're often told this stuff is powered by renewables and it's green and don't worry about it, it's all good, just don't ask too many difficult questions. And I think it's something that we have to start sort of, challenging more. And I would say, and this is possibly a little bit shocking, I would say the reality looks more like this. Right? The reality is that there is a huge amount of brute forcing going on. There is a huge amount of tactical decision making about the energy sources that are being used to power the data centers. And there's this sort of perception that this is a silver bullet, right? It's going to fix all ills. It's going to solve everything. It's going to be like the answer for everything. And I think the reality is actually the bridge is broken. And, even if it makes it over the bridge, by the way, you'll see the tunnel has disappeared as well. So in the picture as well, in case you can't see at the back, is an awful lot of e-waste being generated. Like, we're just not hearing like the reality of the refresh cycles of GPUs, and the reality that GPUs aren't lasting very long because they're being sweat at near capacity. They're being melted essentially by being hammered. So the economic model that this is based on is wild, right? So I won't go into all the ins and outs, mainly because I'm not an economist. But you don't need to be an economist to look at the basic numbers that don't add up. A lot of these platforms it's costing them $3 for every dollar of revenue that they're bringing in. That's not a sustainable business. So, this sort of idea that all we need to do is just throw more resource, more compute, more, materials, more energy, regardless of how that electricity is powered, really needs to be challenged. The other thing I would say is this thing is also breaking trust. It's fundamentally undermining the tracks it's running on, right? And the reason I've made this bridge synthetic and weird colored is that ultimately this thing is generating a load of synthetic information and it's putting it into the information space when these solutions rely on quality information to generate decent outcomes. And there is something well known, there's a Nature piece about model collapse. If you train these things on synthetic data, eventually they start spitting out gobbledygook. And so there are major challenges here, and I could spend a lot of time, and I won't because I don't have the time tonight, talking about the various social problems that this is creating, the misinformation, the fact that it's very sycophantic and likes to be agreeable and give you an answer that you're going to agree with rather than an answer that's necessarily correct. And I think we are sleepwalking into a whole bunch of different challenges, and I've got various pieces out there that I've written about sort of sleepwalking issues on this space. And so I think there's not only sort of energy and material challenges here, there's like, what ripple effect is this having on our businesses, our organizations, our society, the education system? Like, the list just goes on and on for me. And I fear that it's almost creating as many problems as it's solving. Don't get me wrong, I think it can be amazing. And I like probably many in the room, use the technology on a regular basis. I try and use it conscientiously, and when I think it's adding value, and not trying not to use it frivolously. But the reality is it's got some fundamental problems that we're not really facing into, and quite frankly are sort of being brushed aside as, no, don't worry about that. All we need to do is build a bigger model and those problems will go away. We just need to give more power, more data centers, bigger model, more investment, and these things go away because eventually this thing magically becomes smart. The reality, as I'm sure many of you know, is this is really mimicking human language. It's not really understanding human language. And until we get more sophisticated models that really understand the world and physical concepts and causality and linkages to things, rather than just being able to parrot certain sentences back to you in a convincing manner, this thing isn't truly going to be intelligent, right? It's just mimicking, and it's a incredibly good confidence trickster. So I'm not, again, I don't want to take away the fact it can be very valuable. But my point is, it's about humans. So you may not have seen on this slide, there are some humans here, some people climbing up the mountain using a range of different tools. And the reality is, to build proper automation, build proper intelligent systems that push us forward, we need to be augmenting people, certainly with the current generation of technology that we're dealing with today. And so there's a lot of talk of displacing people. I'm not going to deny there is some job displacement that's going to happen, but I would argue if your job is displaced by some of these technologies, this may be a bit controversial, your job may not have been that interesting to start with, quite frankly, and it should maybe have been automated a while ago. What I think the future is things like AlphaFold from DeepMind, where it's a combination of different technologies, different models, different approaches. It's grounded in reality, it's grounded in facts, and it's crucially using the right model for the right job. It's not just picking one model, throwing every problem at it, and assuming it's always going to work, because I think that's a mistake. So, another analogy, time. When time was introduced to society, we had clock towers. And I think there's some really interesting parallels here about the AI infrastructure build out. So, clock towers clearly have advantages, large reach, and it's a way of people telling the time. However, they're not the only way that we tell, the society tell the time. That we started introducing mantelpiece clocks, we started introducing pocket watches, and of course we now have smartwatches and time all over the place. But if you look at time, it presents an interesting story as to like how technology evolves. And I think that, that technology will stay in the sort of clock tower sort of approach is a mistake. And so there's some parallels here that also, you could kind of think about the mainframe to the PC sort of transition if you're more technically inclined. There's been originally compute was in a big mainframe. It was very expensive, very bulky, and over time it miniaturized and was democratized. And I think the same will be true of AI infrastructure. This idea that we have to have all of our AI running in massive data centers, I really think it needs challenging. Don't get me wrong, for training massive models, then yes, sure, there are advantages to running all of that training in a centralized place. But it leads to a lack of transparency, right? James will come on to some of this, like trying to find accurate numbers, accurate data about environmental impact and social impact is really, really hard because the providers don't have to provide it. The other question I would leave with you as well is who benefits from this centralized, essentially mopping up of all intellectual capital and jobs and work to a handful of tech platforms. That for me is a question we really need to be asking. And then given I presented this to government, like there are many critical national infrastructure type use cases where it's just not appropriate to put those things on the public cloud or not appropriate to put those things in other parts of the world than the UK. So I think we will start to see different infrastructures for more critical and sensitive workloads where there's privacy challenges, compliance challenges, and so on and so forth. And with this presents a really interesting opportunity for heat reuse. So we've had talks at Green Tech Southwest previously about heat networks, like Bristol has one. But it doesn't just have to be just big community heat networks. There's some amazing UK companies doing innovation like Heater. I think, has Heater been to Green Tech Southwest? I can't remember if it has. No? So people have mentioned them, but what Heater do is put a server essentially on a hot water tank in someone's home and provide up to 80% of the person's hot water needs for free. So the electricity that consumes is paid for, and it displaces gas and it runs a compute workload. So it does 2 bits of work for 1 bit of electricity. It's incredible. So there are some really interesting, innovative things coming out of the UK and Europe around heat reuse as well as providing compute. So really interesting opportunities there. But ultimately, where I think this is going is edge AI. So Cevo, data center, and Deep Green, there's an amazing project there. I will move on swiftly because I will go into a rabbit hole around heat reuse. We don't have time, but no, absolutely, there are some amazing projects out there. But where I think this is going is mobile devices. I think there's a few reasons for that. One is ultimately the sensitivity of some of what we're using our AI for. A lot of our AI is actually very personal. The conversations we have with AI are very sensitive subjects in a lot of cases. Like there's been studies to show how much AI is being used and for what and by who. And by far one of the biggest use cases for generative AI is essentially like a coach or like a personal assistant-y type conversation, often very sensitive topics that you wouldn't necessarily want leaking. So actually running that on device and looking at what Apple is planning to do. So Apple at the moment have recognized they're a little bit behind. They've partnered with Google. The Gemini model is going to run a future version of Siri. Ultimately, you can run the Google Gemini model actually on your own machine right now if you wanted to. If you've got a reasonably powerful computer, you can download something called Gemma, which is the open source equivalent, and you can run that on your machine. So you can do that today. Fairly soon you'll be able to run that on your phone. And the advantage of that, of course, is running it on your phone, we can make make reuse of existing assets that we already have, and we diffuse the demand for power. Part of the problem with the centralized data center is you need a huge amount of concentrated power in one place. In the UK, we have challenges there because we have renewables generation capacity, but we really struggle to move that power around the UK. So my argument is we should start trying to shift the compute to where the power is, rather than trying to shift the power to where the compute needs to be built out. So the open source movement is really interesting and promising, and like there's massive amounts of innovation happening there. If you're not already, I really encourage you to look at things like LM Studio and Ollama. They're actually really quite easy. Like LM Studio is literally a very simple graphical user interface. You can browse the models, download them, and play around with them. It's not actually as hard as, say, like open source was when it was Linux and kind of the old days of open source. Open source projects are now far more accessible than they ever have been, and so this is quite exciting. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Tech Carbon Standard, like I said I would, because this is ultimately another key part of the solution, which is we need to start measuring things better so we actually understand what the impacts are. And I think traditionally, the technology industry has pointed us towards one particular area of emissions and tried to direct our attention away from other areas. So upstream is actually quite significant. I don't have time to kind of run through all this. This is all online on the Tech Carbon Standard website. But essentially upstream is the things you buy, whether that's software, hardware, devices. And essentially, there's an awful lot of footprint involved in the manufacturing process, the full life cycle of devices, right? And actually, our work with clients suggests that 60 up to 60% of your footprint as a large organization, like a fairly sizable organization, can be in the hardware purchasing. So operational is the running the electricity, the electricity that needs to power your devices, your servers, your equipment. And then indirectly, if you have managed services and cloud services, someone else is paying the electricity bill, but they're still obviously running a service for you. Downstream is then anything you build. If you build apps or you build digital services, what's the impact of those being run and consumed on people's devices? That's often completely, disregarded as sort of being out of scope. And then on here, what we've also got is a mapping to the GHG protocol scopes. For those of you who know the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, we've done a mapping against that so people can kind of understand how to navigate this space. And like I say, an awful lot of an awful lot of attention goes to this operational category, because arguably there's a good story. In some cases, there is a good story around renewables. Like many of the big tech companies, I've invested quite heavily in renewables. Sometimes that's more of a carbon accountancy reality. What do I mean by that? I mean, they purchase renewables, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's powering the data center that they're operating. As I said, hardware can often be over 60% or 50, 60% or more of the footprint of a large organization. And then downstream efficiency of the services we're building is really important. And I think, unfortunately, as an industry, technology has favored developer productivity over machine productivity. And by that, I mean, we just need to get stuff developed and shipped faster, regardless of the consequences to how efficiently that thing runs. And I think that's something we need to start challenging, particularly around AI, when there is far more at stake and far more power being consumed. So we recently added AI to Tech Carbon Standard. There's some hints on here you can see, but without further ado, I'm going to hand over to James to talk about the work he's been doing in detail on here.
Okay. So, the first thing we did when we wanted to start incorporating AI into the system, into the Tech Carbon Standard, was look at the existing literature around this space. A couple of years ago, there wasn't a huge amount, but since over the last 2 years, there's obviously been a lot of interest in AI, and that's resulted in a lot of studies. And so we undertook a literature review to see, what's already out there. Quick show of hands. Who here has heard of a life cycle assessment or LCA? Okay, we've got, all right, that's just most of the room, I'd say. So I won't dwell on this too much, but for those who don't know, life cycle assessment, it dates back to the 70s, and it can be used on any object and goes from pulling materials out of the ground through to disposing of the item at the end of its life, and the stages in between. The Tech Carbon Standard can be mapped to the LCA pretty easily. And unsurprisingly, most of the people who have studied the impact of AI have used the LCA as an overriding underlying framework to frame their studies. I also found a really interesting framework called computer-related impacts, and I think it's beautifully complementary to LCA-derived systems, because it tries to encourage more of a holistic view of how you're using your technology, and more specifically AI. I'll cover it in more detail a little later. And we're also looking at some sources for numbers like the Hugging Face website. If you haven't seen it, they provide downloads of foundational models for AI LLMs that you can, and they also have a tool for rating their power efficiency. Commercial models can be uploaded and checked on it, but it's all about self-reporting, and that has its own problems because a lot of people don't want to report how inefficient their model is. Now, the problem with the LCA is that often we don't have all the data we need. So when you're looking, if your job is to write a piece of software like mine is, I don't really know what went into the mining and distribution of the laptop that I'm using, right? If I'm lucky, then the people who manufactured that laptop have calculated the embodied carbon for me, and I can work that into my assessment. But Is the calculation they use for that the same as it was 2 years ago? Spoiler alert, it's not. Um, is it the same as that of another manufacturer? Again, I'm afraid not. So actually comparing the embodied carbon of two different pieces of equipment is a guideline at best. At the other end of the scale, do we really know what's happening to, I don't know, smartphones because of the decisions we've made during development? Probably not. And we're never going to see a lot of that data. So by necessity, we have to draw a line somewhere. And obviously, in these studies, they want to focus on particular aspects. Otherwise, they'll just get drawn into a rabbit hole and not produce anything at all. So that boundary has to be drawn somewhere, and they end up making assumptions about certain parts of it to kind of cover that off or ignoring it completely. The other thing that can happen is that depending on where you draw those boundaries, you can alter the story, which can lead to greenwashing. I'm going to pick on OpenAI a little bit here. They recently put out, Sam Altman recently put out a blog post, and he put in some actually decent numbers about what it costs to infer to do a query against ChatGPT. And the numbers are reasonable, but there's no detail about how he arrived at those numbers. They're in the right ballpark, but what was the query? Was he generating an image, or was he generating some text? How much text? I couldn't tell you. He also put a measurement for how much water it uses. Now, that was a bit lowballed. And the reason for that, actually, another quick question. Who's heard of PUE? What's that, about a third of the room? WUE? Oh, I said it. Sorry, I always stumble over that. WUE source. Ellen. She wrote a part of our tech carbon standard covering it. Right, so PUE is power usage. Is it effectiveness or efficiency? Effectiveness. And you can use it to calculate how much carbon something is using. WUE is water usage effectiveness. And WUE source is the same thing, but at the power station. So what you can do is you can push your PUE down by bringing your WUE up. Yeah, so you can shout about lovely carbon figures while also wasting huge amounts of water. What Sam Altman did is he excluded, or whoever supplied him with the information, excluded the source water. So however much energy they were drawing to power the data center that was running these queries was drawing extra water to cool the power plant, and he's not taken any responsibility for that at all. And this is why I describe that as being a bit greenwashy. Another thing that we found in some of the studies was the perspective you take alters the picture. So one of the really good studies kind of started in the middle and then worked its way outwards as far as it could in both directions. Another one started at the user device and worked its way backwards until it couldn't get any more data. Both brilliant studies and provided some really valuable information. But I think what all of these things, plus the Hugging Face data, kind of showed is that what we need is harmonized functional units that we can report and test in. There's no point having data about how much a ChatGPT query uses up in carbon and water compared to Mistral AI. They've both blogged about that. If we don't know what method they use to derive that information, because how do I know I'm comparing apples and cars? You know, they could be derived so differently. This was the computer-related impacts model that I told you about. So I absolutely love this. It starts off in the center, and these are your direct impacts. It's just a completely different way of looking at the problem to the TCS. And what you're looking at here is, let's say you've brought on, let's pretend you've made an AI-based system for improving, I don't know, the software build process. It's going to analyze your build process, configuration files, and recommend improvements. You might buy an extra couple of servers for that, or you might buy some extra cloud compute. Those are your direct impacts. You've changed this, and now you need that. As we move to the next ring, these are the immediate impacts because of that. So let's say because we've now built those extra servers, we're now drawing more power. Perhaps that's had an impact on power systems in the area, or agriculture because there's less water around because we're using it up in our data center now. So these are things that you can kind of draw a direct line to from what you just changed. And then finally, all around the outside, we have our system level impacts. These are all the things that changed unintentionally, or possibly intentionally, but not as a direct consequence of what you did. For example, maybe you've just introduced an app that locks people into a specific vendor. Maybe you've only released a Windows version of your app and now they have to use Microsoft in that particular industry because they really need your app. Perhaps you've, really hopeful one, perhaps you've brought down cut the carbon of queries by a third, and now 2/3 more people are using that service. You haven't actually lowered the amount of carbon you're emitting, you've raised it. I think this is popularly called Jevons paradox, that making a system more efficient can increase its usage. And this is a great model to look at to kind of understand the wider effects that we as technologists have on the world around us. So another aspect of the literature was around the carbon impact of AI. So traditionally, we tend to think of training models as being the big hitter. But, most conversations I've seen online have talked about training as being, oh, yeah, that's the really intensive bit. That's where you've got like all of these servers running GPUs to death and drawing loads of power. I think there was recently an interview with the CEO of Microsoft, where he said that they've got warehouses full of GPUs that they can't deploy because there's not enough power where their data centers are, which kind of shows the scale of what they're doing. But the inference, one of the studies we found suggested that inference is actually the act of querying AI has now outstripped training quite significantly. I was reading earlier that I think ChatGPT in June were said to be dealing with 2.5 billion queries a day. So even if it is only a thimbleful of water, just think how much 2.5 billion thimblefuls of water adds up to a day. So we need to kind of push back against this idea that that inference is almost free, that the amounts are so inconsequential that we don't need to worry about it. Another thing that kind of came out was the impact also depend on the usage patterns, and I've also already mentioned the boundary problem. But with usage patterns, what I'm saying here is that generating 400 pieces of characters of text is clearly going to take up less energy than generating an image. One of the things I like about Hugging Face's process is that they actually look at what the model is for in their calculations when they give it an energy rating. So after all that depression, what can we do about it? So if you're working in part of the industry that actually hosts LLMs, we need to, as Ollie started to say, we need to move towards smaller models. If you've got that system I described earlier that just analyzes build files, it doesn't need to know what the capital of Canada is. Yeah, it doesn't need to have read the collective works of Dan Brown. What it does need to have read is a shed load of build files. So it's obviously going to be quicker to train. It's going to use up less energy to train that because you're only feeding it relevant data. Uh, there are also other techniques you can use, such as pruning and quantization. I don't know enough about them to talk about them, but perhaps we can look into those afterwards. Grid-aware training came up a lot in the papers that we looked at. So the idea here, which I'm sure many of you have seen before, is that you look at what the energy mix is where your application is hosted and you shift it somewhere that's got a cleaner energy mix. You need to do that with some awareness of where you are and what you're doing. Yeah, so it may look really tempting to shift everything to France because it's got nuclear and really low carbon, but nuclear also has the worst water usage out of all the possible power types. So again, you're moving the problem to something else. They also talked about time shifting. I don't want to say that it's not something that you shouldn't consider, but you shouldn't consider it without looking into it in detail first. There are some dangers around time shifting, particularly around if you had several companies that were all grid aware. The idea here is that you'd try and move the workload to a time of the day when the energy mix was cleaner. But by doing that, you might change the power demands and thus alter the energy mix. The worst case scenario being that they fire up a bunch of diesel generators to meet the power demand you just gave them. Green Web Foundation published a brilliant article on this a year or so ago. Highly recommend you look at it if you're interested in time shifting before you actually do it. But I mention it because it came up a lot in papers. So if you do any research in the same areas, then you're going to come across the same recommendation as we did. Inference optimization. Again, so if you're hosting, you can batch the queries together to basically get more bang for your buck out of the carbon you're using up. You can cache queries and knowledge that's used in those queries, and also again task-specific models. That build system I mentioned, obviously, if it's got a smaller knowledge base to search, the query is going to use up less energy and thus less carbon, less water, and everything else. And finally, we look at life cycle approaches. So let's say you're building your own hosting your own server. You might want to consider, you should right size the service to begin with. Don't get the biggest, most powerful server you can afford in your budget. Get one that runs the workload appropriately. Consider a refurbished server or piece of equipment. And equally, at the other end of the scale, when you finally burn it out, is there any way you can dispose of it more responsibly? There are companies that can help with that. I think a local one is Circularity First. But again, looking at how you source the servers and get rid of them afterwards can also make a big impact, especially in that 60% bracket that Ollie was talking about earlier. So you'll be glad to know I'm almost done. In conclusion, we need to measure more comprehensively. And that includes things like our own inference setup, yeah? So when you're looking at using AI, look at how many queries your organization makes in a day. Look at what kind of queries they are, because, like I say, not all queries are equal. And there is data out there that can help you calculate what the carbon impact of that is and manage it. We need to also report transparently. As I said, people who are measuring this stuff but not publishing the methodology that goes with it aren't helping much. They're helping a bit. It's a move in the right direction, but if I can't see how you achieved that number, I can't really evaluate it against anyone else, and thus its value drops very, very sharply. It's a little more than a PR exercise. Try and take a holistic view to avoid those unexpected consequences, to avoid Jevons paradox, to see how the change you're making is affecting the larger society. And make it visible. Make it a KPI or a non-functional requirement. So when we specify software, we talk about, it's got to load up in this many seconds. It's got to be secure. It's got to be able to handle this many queries a month. It's got to have this carbon emissions. If we don't make these figures visible and publish them, or at the very least use them to direct our own decisions, then we're not going to get any better.
Yeah, thanks, James. So yeah, we're done. This is our kind of Q&A slide. I just wanted to slightly plug Hannah again for a couple of things. First, I mean, James mentioned the grid-aware concept. Hannah was kind enough actually to come on our podcast to talk about grid-aware software. So if you wanted to dive into that in more depth, Hannah was very kind with her time, and we did a great Can We Do Better Than Carbon-Aware Computing episode with her. We also mentioned Hugging Face a couple of times in our talk. This is Dr. Sasha Lucioni. Her latest TED Talk is fantastic. It's 10 minutes long. She does a far better job of articulating this problem than I did in some sort of space of time. She's incredible. I'm really looking forward to going to Green I/O in Paris next week, where she will be on the line up there, which is really exciting. And this is just like a last plug, I suppose, for our blog, where we've got a sustainability category. We publish all of our stuff about Tech Carbon Standard and our research and our various bits of work there. So do go and check out our sustainability section of our blog. And with that, we are done and open for questions.
Yeah, over to Joanne from Bristol Waste and ESG Institute. Round of applause to warm her up.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me here. I'm really excited to take part in all of this. Just a quick word about myself. You'll notice that I do not have a local accent. It is Canadian, not American. That's how we define ourselves, and never more so than now, right, Mark? Yeah, definitely the Canadian thing going on. If I do get speaking too quickly, as I'm from the east coast of Canada, please just put your hand up and give me an indication to slow down if I go too quickly. And just a comment to you, James, when you made reference to your age earlier, I'm pretty sure I'm older than you, but I'm looking around here and I'm thinking there might even be one more person in this room a little bit older than me. I was post-card punch era, but not by much. So I have been around the industry for a little while. As the introduction, I am the head of IT and data at Bristol Waste. I've been there now for 9 years. I'm also 9 months. Was that a Freudian slip or what? I'm also the executive director and co-founder of the ESG Institute, which is a organization that is focused on training, advisory, and solution provision around the globe for particularly SMEs in ESG arena. But I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, and I'm just going to shift around here for a second so I can work there. Oh, shit. Thought I'd get myself through this. So that's part. Anyway, so I'm here to talk to you about going from the footprint to the framework and how to approach in a practical manner to embed sustainability into your digital enterprise. And what does that journey potentially look like? And I will use, yeah. So when we get into talking about all of this, the big question is, will technology harm the world or the planet, or will it help it heal? Now, it's probably not news to any of you that coming from the tech industry that the tech is one of the largest emitters of CO2 globally. Around 2 to 4% comes from the tech and use altogether. Much what we were talking about in terms of AI, but even as you had also mentioned, that our own devices and the amount that we're using it. And that's something that when you're in the tech industry, you could feel guilty about, but you can look at it and say there's an opportunity to really have an impact as we go forward. And it is one of the areas of the fastest growth areas of carbon emissions. But then again, how many of us are getting on the AI bandwagon and amongst many other things? So by extension, it's naturally going to start to go up from there. But we don't have to look at it and say, well, this is a bad thing. There's a lot of things we can be using tech for that is going to help with that sustainability journey. Now, one of the things I often refer to when I'm doing these talks is what I'm very passionate about is making the distinction between tech-enabled sustainability, using our tech in a positive way to help things be sustainable, and then sustainable tech. And that's everything that's going on behind the scenes in your infrastructure, your software coding, and so on. Um, when we get talking about it, there's a hidden footprint when we think about our sustainable tech environment. Many people, when we get talking about IT or tech, we're not thinking about everything that's in behind. There's a lot of references to the GPUs, the speeds, the servers, and so on. And not everyone is thinking about that. And unless you're looking at it and considering it, you're not really taking in the big picture of how much impact your tech is actually having for you, or in the environment around. And what I try to encourage and I often speak to is that as tech leaders, and by tech leader, I don't necessarily mean those people who are the CIOs of the world, but to me, every tech person at whatever level you're working at, you are a tech leader and you have the ability to have and control the impact of your technology from a sustainability perspective, but is getting aware that you have that impact. And there's many tech people I've spoken to who are not thinking about it yet. Now, to me, in a room like this, I'm looking at a lot of very progressive people for whom I speak to in this regard. Um, and there is a true opportunity to step up into a leadership role in your organizations to help drive that conversation. Very often, when companies or organizations start to look and plan out their sustainability journey, the sustainability department, or that's a team unto itself, in the same way that finance and HR and then IT are, or IT is. But they don't say, we need IT sitting at this table while we're having this conversation from the very onset. And that has to shift. Because if you think about it, if you're reporting on your ESG, if you're talking about your sustainability, what are you basing all of that on? Your data. Where's the data? It's in your IT infrastructure, isn't it? It's coming from our systems. And that is the absolute essence of everything that we're doing, no matter which standard for ESG reporting you're using or what you're measuring, any of that. So that's where it starts from, is just that alone. The very foundation of everything is coming out of our tech environment. And that's where we get to lead that conversation and actually have that contribution. One of the challenges, a few of the challenges, one is many IT people are not necessarily sustainability aware. They haven't been trained, or they're just starting to understand, but they don't necessarily make the connection between the sustainability and the tech and how it can play into that. The same thing holds true at a CEO level in many organizations. Now, in my experience, because with the ESG Institute, it's very much a global organization. Now, so I talk to a lot of people from around the world, and where they're at on that journey. Now, there's a lot of CEOs, particularly in the SMEs, that are going, well, I have a business to run. I need to make money. There's all this stuff about sustainability. I don't know what's what, and I don't have time to learn. And neither do the other people in their organization. So somebody has to kind of step up and try to cut through all of that and understand what needs to happen for them to say, okay, just give me the basics, let me get on with it. In many cases, they look at it and they're thinking, one and undone. This is a project. I'm going to put some sustainable reporting in and a little bit of this and get on with my life. And ultimately, greenwashing comes out of that equation as well, not just from the AI side. So yeah, there's an education and awareness that has to happen, and it has to happen quickly. If you're a global multinational, you have the resources. You have the money to hire the best to come in and put the teams in place. But that's not the case for 80 to 90% of the organizations that are out there operating at this point in time. So there is a real opportunity here for you as a tech leader, regardless of your role, to really help direct that conversation that says, we need to be using our tech, we need to be doing it wisely, and we need to use it to have an impact. But then you guys know that because that's why you're here. So I'd like to speak to this type of an audience. Bristol Waste. Let me tell you a little bit about Bristol Waste. I do not come from the waste industry. I originally come from the energy and tech industry. So before I got into Bristol Waste and ESG Institute, I was global head of IT at Siemens Energy, managing IT in 40 countries. Particularly, one of our largest market focus was on the oil and gas industry. So that topic alone, clearly, how do you start to decarbonize the oil industry? Oh, and that's where my journey into sustainability and tech-enabled sustainability came into play. And one of the first projects I worked on in that capacity was a digital twin for the Stavanger, I see a nodding head over here, for the Stavanger oil platform in the North Sea. And I can tell you from a tech perspective, it was pretty cool shit that we were working on. I'm not going to lie. Like literally today, you could be anywhere in the world and you could put on VR goggles and you could be walking around on that platform in real time, diagnosing what's happening. And this was the forerunner that I had worked on. So it was pretty cool from a techie's perspective is to working on that type of a project. But that's what got me to really start to get passionate about the whole thing about sustainability and the tech coming together, because that's what we were doing. Digitizing, using edge devices, AI, IoT, to make that a reality. And taking it. And that's where I kind of said, and then people say, well, how the hell did you go from Siemens Energy to Bristol Waste? There's a long journey in between all of that for personal reasons, but it's actually quite interesting working in the waste industry. And I would never have thought I'd have said, it's actually really exciting and kind of sexy for what the waste industry could do. Yeah, Mark, I would give me a funny look too. I mean, if only thinking like get a life, woman. Like, really? No, but it is interesting to see where the waste and recycling industry can go to. And there's a huge market potential in all of that. Now, by nature, what it is, it's a sustainability focused organization, of course. I can tell you the reality is really starting that journey. On one hand, yes, recycling and trying to do the reporting is definitely happening. But the data is like my daily nightmare. Trying to deal with the data, the reporting, the challenges of a legacy organization with a lot of legacy IT, and you're trying to take on that journey. So when I came in, I'm thinking, great, local company, sustainability focus, this is going to be great. We're going to be really leading the edge. I could not be any further from the truth when I came in. So there's a lot of work to be done. And that's a lot of the focus I'm doing in Bristol Waste right now, is how do we take that historical legacy organization and really embed sustainability into the tech environment. I have a young team. They don't have the green skills. That's the first place for us to start, is the awareness. I will say this, though. One of the highlights of what we're doing from the IT side of things at Bristol Waste is that we have an IT reuse department where we are taking donated equipment, refurbishing laptops, repurposing them. Very much involved within Bristol City for digital inclusion, for social value reporting, and so on. And that's a really exciting part of what we're doing from an IT perspective. So dealing with everything from the old laptops, putting them back out into the organizations, refurbishing them, getting them out into communities of people who need them, everything from mobile phones to high-end laptops. So there's a lot happening in that regard from an IT team perspective, as well as getting the data cleaned up so we can start to do the proper reporting and looking at all of the legacy systems and how can we start to reduce the number of systems that we have and streamline it. So on one hand, it's very challenging. It's a new environment, but I'm really excited about the potential impact that can come out of that. And what it does for me is it helps me take everything I've been learning about this topic that I do a lot of speaking on and take it and say, now, in real life, in practical terms, how do I make that happen? And that's a lot of the journey that I'm on right now. So yeah, so we're looking at everything from using IoT devices on the trucks, the vehicles, in rubbish bins, so that we can get warnings as to when might need somebody to go and empty out that public rubbish bin down on the waterfront or something along those lines. To our existing IT environment, and as I mentioned, our reuse department. So there's a lot of things that at a very base level you can start to look at. And it's having the idea, it's feeding into the larger Bristol Waste sustainability strategy and helping to enable that. So not only do we contribute to that sustainability strategy, we're also supporting the other departments for them to be able to do the same thing as well. Now, all of the data, and you made some references to some of the data and the greenwashing. Every bit of data that we report against out into the public for Bristol City is verified independently, so that there can never be that coming back saying, this is, how did you come up with these figures? What is this really based on? It has to all be independently verified so people can have confidence. So you, as Bristolians, can have confidence that when Bristol Waste tells you that we're doing this for the social value perspective, we really are doing it. But this is where I get into, we're talking about digital transformation, sustainable transformation, and emerging technology, what I call the trifecta. I often refer to it as the trifecta, because these three areas are coming together on a consistent basis. And it is the combining of those three collectively and cohesively where you're going to have the biggest impact. Too often you see in IT organizations where people go, well, we're going to do a digital transformation program. And they do it completely independent. And then someone a year down the road says, yeah, but we have to do this. And now that business has to probably redo a large percentage of the work that they had done a year earlier. Totally inefficient. And I think one time, historically, we probably could be doing things like that. But these days, we need to be looking at it collectively as well. Now, that becomes a lot of work to try to manage. So I always break things down into the 3 M's, make it modular, make it measurable, make it manageable. This is what's going to help you to take it along, because when you start to look at this, step back and you look at the whole picture, it can be quite overwhelming when you start to look at your own IT organization and say, how are we going to move down that and get on that journey and go down that pathway? So you do need to think about how you're going to deliver as well. And breaking things down is the most easy way. I'm a firm believer in keeping things simple. So it's been an interesting journey so far with Bristol Waste, and coming up with the strategy. And now how are we going to implement that? So now we get into executing against that. And what do you need to be thinking about as you're operating or working towards your execution and realization of it? And there's any number of areas. And, from the software side of things, which is not my area of expertise per se, but I'm really going to want conversations with you guys. A lot of interest in that coming up. Obviously, your infrastructure, the data itself, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges for most organizations is your data. Where is it coming from? What is the quality? How readily can you get to it? Can you report against it? Do the people in your organization know how to use data analytics in a practical sense in their day-to-day work? A lot of challenges in that regard. The applications that you're looking at, do you have a lot of legacy applications? Can you simplify your environment? Can you simplify your environment, reduce the number of applications, make them more efficient? Because if you have a lot of legacy bespoke applications, they will not be as efficient as some of the newer systems that are being developed today, and people adhering to new coding standards, for example, as they're developing them. Your devices, and as well as your vendors. You need to be looking at your vendors, procurement perspectives. A lot of organizations these days are putting sustainable procurement into their tendering process as standard. People have to do it. So I think it's important that you also take all of that into consideration as you go forward. So where does that take us? So we've gone from Bristol Waste, which I'm, living in. How do we practically get there? I've mentioned the ESG Institute. This is a startup. This is a startup it's only 2.5 years old. However, we are currently represented in 67 countries. We have over 6,000 active students enrolled in our online training programs right now. We have over 16,000 followers on LinkedIn and growing by 100 or so every week. Yeah, I'm going to take a moment and brag, aren't I, Laura? Yeah. We've already had over 100,000 unique visitors and to our website, and we will be announcing in the next week an MOU and a big kicking off signing ceremony that will be happening in Hanoi in Vietnam next month, where we will work with the Hanoi University and the Vietnamese government and a number of other organizations are providing training into those areas as well. And this is where I go from being my day job at Bristol Waste and very hands-on, practical, living the dream of taking this legacy company and making it totally sustainable from the tech perspective, to taking it to that higher level and really getting out and talking to people and having those conversations globally at very many different regional instances to say, what's it going to take to make this happen? And this is a conversation that is happening around the world. And with that in mind, one of the things that for yourselves, because I mentioned earlier about it's the opportunity and getting yourselves up to speed and aware. Now, we will be opening up this month, a little bit later this month. There will be an online free program that you will have access to if you want as a foundation certificate in sustainable tech. And there's also a free one on ESG reporting if you want to start to build up your skills. This is not me trying to sell you on the ESG institutes, training programs. This is me saying, you as tech people, you can get access to the foundations as a starting point. These will be, like I said, they will be made available to you. That you can sign up and you can go on the waiting list. And once we open it, you can get started on it. All of the courses that we offer are CPD accredited as well, the Continuing Professional Development Board. And they're self-paced. These ones are generally 10 hours worth of training, I guess it is around that. But the most of our programs are about 2 to 3 months worth of training. So they're quite extensive in what they are. But that will be available to you. And I highly suggest that you please take the time, go out, take a look at it, whether it's through the ESG Institute or otherwise. Build on your own skills and knowledge by virtue of the fact that you're here right now says that you're interested in this topic, and obviously it matters to you where it's going to go to. The biggest thing is to understand it is a journey. All of us are going to be at different places on that. I would say to you, you're further on that journey because you're already looking at green technology and sustainable technology. So kudos to yourselves for that. There are lots of resources out there. The blogs and things, which again, I'm listening to you going like, oh my God, this is so cool. We're definitely going to get all of that information, as well as the carbon literacy that you had mentioned as well. Because you guys are the leaders, you need to understand what's going to be there. This will be future-proofing your own careers, because sustainability, sustainable tech, and bringing it into your business and into your IT environment is not a one-off thing. It's not a project. This is going to be your bread and butter going forward on an ongoing basis. So with that, it gives you a bit of an idea as to what that journey could look like. It's very multifaceted. It's very challenging. And I like to say it's quite exciting, to be fair. And yeah, with that, any questions?
Thank you very much. We're just going to bring some benches out, and then we'll invite Ollie and James back, and we'll take some questions. Just give us a couple of minutes. Hello? Okay, Joanne. Great stuff. So we'll take some questions. If we run out of time, I believe we're all going to Left-Handed Giant, so you can grab the speakers over a pint over there. But yeah, we'll take questions from the floor.
Thanks for the talks, Fadl Issa. Question for you, James. You mentioned non-functional requirements in your talk. How well do you think we are doing at capturing requirements generally in this space for AI? I mean, in terms of AI development, are we even using requirements? Is that something that are we placing any constraints on what we want to see? What? Yeah, just interested to hear your thoughts on that more generally.
Thank you. I think the answer is no, we're not using them right now, and hence me talking about it. This is similar to security, right? If you go back, 5, 10 years, it wasn't on anyone's radar. No one gave a monkeys about it. And then lots of people got hacked, and all of a sudden we started making systems that were secure by default. And we need to do the same now with sustainability. And to your point, we are the leaders. We're the ones who need to do that. So we need to start building it into our thinking, making it a requirement of our systems that it's not something that we add as an afterthought. It's something we add as a requirement, that we build it in from day one. We make the system more sustainable. And the shortcut to that is to make it more efficient. I mean, we were chatting earlier about that systems, computers used to have less power, less memory. And at that time, we would write software in such a way that it didn't require, that it lived within the constraints. Constraints are our friend. They're what drive creativity. And it's by applying constraints to ourselves and living within our means to some degree. I think you've mentioned donut economics in the past. If anyone's not familiar with it, it's the idea of instead of looking at economics in the traditional way, you look at it as a donut, and in the middle is how it affects people. So, if people are, so you can evaluate a society based on whether people are on the poverty line, whether they've got access to clean water, and what have you. And then on the outer edge of the donut, you look at how much energy are we consuming versus how much the planet has available, and are we living beyond our means in that sense? And with computing, we've got really used to every year there being a bigger processor, new technology, more memory available, cloud computing, all you can eat buffet. It's amazing. And we need to reverse that thinking and start actually going, well, actually, to solve this problem, I don't need huge amounts of memory, and I don't need a really fast processor. If I just write it more efficiently, it will use up less power. It will need the servers will last longer. If we support older OSs, that people won't have to upgrade their phone every 2.5 minutes. And it's all these things that drive change. So to answer your original question, no, we're not taking it into account. Yes, we must.
Great stuff. Thanks for the question. And next question. And yeah.
Okay. Hi. I've learned just so much now about sort of the life cycle and the energy involved in creation of AI and all of the back end. But what I'd like to understand a little bit more about is, as an AI consumer or an AI user, what can we do to minimize the impact, the environmental impact of AI as users? And certainly in the context where I'm at is I'm in the position to be establishing guidelines for my colleagues on how we're going to use AI and how we're going to implement it within our teams. And what can we do about sustainability within those kind of guidelines as users, not as developers?
Yeah, and there's many of our clients are asking the same question. In fact, I was at a private equity company's ESG summit, and I was asked questions along those lines. And I think the problem is, to James's point about measurement and understanding what our impact is, we struggle to have, even the sort of base data to understand what some of the impact is, let alone to the average consumer. What does that really mean, right? Because the average consumer sadly does not deal in kilograms of CO2. Let's face it, right? It's a sustainability niche thing. So when I speak to clients about this, it generally comes back to sensible, pragmatic decision making about using the right tool for the job. And at the moment, we're all guilty, unfortunately. Not everyone. A lot of people are guilty of getting rather swept away and carried away with a new shiny thing that looks very promising and can do everything. But there's a great phrase that my tech mentor gave me, which is, Oliver, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there's another one, isn't there? There's the with great power comes responsibility. I can quote those sort of cliches all night, but my point is, it's about choosing the right tool for the job and then actually learning how to use the tool efficiently. And by that I mean you can have lots of little chatty interactions with a language model, or you can spend a little bit of time thinking through, maybe even in a Word document, God forbid, what the problem is you want it to solve before you even fire up the thing. Actually do a bit of thinking. What is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the context? Do you already have documents? Do you have things you can give it to give it context, rather than, oh, can you do this thing for me? Oh, you've not got that right. Can you do it this way? Oh, no, you've got that bit wrong. It's like we need to sort of think about using these AIs a bit like delegating to a team member rather than doing a Google search. It's a different technology. It needs a different philosophy and a different approach. So I think there's definitely some behavioral change. And I think that's going to come when people start to actually understand this technology better, because quite frankly, right now it's pretty immature, right? And we're all learning. And in fact, a large part of our business at Scott Logic is looking at AI in the software development process. And then James is very much working on, like, not only how do we use these tools, but how do we use these tools in a mindful, conscientious way. And to build on the last point, the last question, one of the first blogs I actually wrote on the sustainability category for Scott Logic was a mini series called Conscientious Computing. And it's very much about this point about we need to become more conscientious as technologists and as consumers of technology, because we've been sort of hoodwinked into believing that, like, there's this abundance mindset that we can adopt, and one day AI will make everything free and we'll all be in this sort of nirvana state where everything is so cheap that you can't. People said that about nuclear energy, right? They said the nuclear energy would be so cheap you wouldn't be able to price it. We've had these sorts of false promises in the past, so I think we all have to sort of apply critical thinking and pragmatic choices.
It's a little bit of actually becoming aware of the cost of it. It's almost like you go way, way, way back to where you have to buy time on each something. And then you had to think about being super efficient with that resource. And now we eat. It just feel like there's cost to it because here it's like such a cheap set. But so do you be thinking that will?
I think it's interesting that we're talking about this from the technical side and what we need to do in behavioral change. But whether you're talking about it from a tech use as tech people or sustainability in general, behavioral change is a major issue. How many people are not even really thinking about their basic sustainability and what they're going to put in the recycle bin at home? And you can guarantee they're not thinking about what they're putting into their AI model and how they're asking the questions. And, when you start to look at this entire topic, there's so many levels to it. It goes so deep. And it's every conversation like this that starts to have an awareness. So much of what the change and behavioral change will come from are organically grown conversations like we're having right now. And you start to get the different perspectives. For a lot of you, you're very much in the nuts and bolts of the technology, whereas for me, it's more that strategic side of implementing the technology as well as the sustainability overall at many different levels. But every bit of that conversation is so relevant. And it is a real challenge because most people say, well, how am I going to make a difference? I'm just one person and I just need to get on with this. So I think there's a bigger conversation that needs to happen. I was speaking at the Communicate conference last week, and it was a lot about how to get that out there and the storytelling that needs to happen. And all of you are people who will go out and help tell that story. So I would definitely encourage you to do so. Help get people to think about what they're doing.
Great stuff. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Both of your presentations had bridges, and you're talking about conscientious computing and trying to get someone to think about their use. Would it be a good visualization to have you start off your day, there's a river running through underneath a bridge, and as you ask each question to AI, the river gets drier and drier and drier, and then eventually you have like all these boats stranded in the mud. You can make it look like Bristol, and you think, oh wow, I've asked quite a few foolish questions here. Maybe tomorrow the water would stay a bit higher.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm a big fan with my presentation of using visuals, right? Because not everyone understands. It's a complex topic, and you need to sort of bring it to an understandable level. And so, I didn't go into all the ins and outs of my analogy, right? So, because I didn't have time. But I think it's generally resonated as something that sort of just makes people realize they're being marketed to, right? The challenge we all have, like a lot of us are probably in the bubble, right? In the sustainability and the tech sustainability bubble, which by the way is even smaller. So we get this stuff, but the problem is so many people are just unaware of it, let alone someone who's the average user of one of these services. They don't know. It's just convenient to them. It's fun. It's helping them. It's doing something for them. So yeah, just this sort of awareness. And I think this is where the Hugging Face stuff's really interesting. Like, can we have, a bit like we have on food, like, can we have eco-labeling for some of our technology services? Because I think then people can make informed choices about, do I choose this AI service or do I choose that one? Because there are people that are concerned about this, and it's great to see the mainstream media this year. In fact, I spoke to Zoe Kleiman, who's the BBC technology journalist, and she started doing more BBC reporting on the impact of data centres, the impact of AI, which is great to see, because we need to raise that awareness, right, to the general population.
Great, thank you. I think there's a question over there. You can shout loudly.
Yes, sorry, one bad man was man. I'm genuinely cause that there are lots of pleasures first. But we did the physiological bits supplying mucus, the donut, whatever those pleasures are, they have limits. And what possible sets can sustainable up beyond us?
Yeah, so is sustainable growth an oxymoron? And there's a fantastic talk by a chap called Christian Felber. It's a great TED talk, and he starts by standing on his head, and he does it to make a point that, like, the world is on its head. And he says if you talk to any economist about growth over a medium to long term time frame, they start shifting very inconveniently on their seat before admitting that the whole thing falls apart over a long term time frame. So we are living in cloud cuckoo land, right? Unfortunately, the reality is it is an oxymoron. It's not possible. It's like, I think all we can do is more conscientious sort of consumerism and more informed sort of choices. But fundamentally, you're right. It is a fantasy to think that we can grow forever on a finite planet. But what we have to do is, I think, just get back to the sort of things that James was talking about, like kind of getting back to proper engineering. Like, constraints actually aren't a bad thing. They can drive innovation, they can drive efficiency, and they can drive new ways of thinking about things. And this mindset that we live in this world of abundance and this techno-optimistic agenda, quite frankly, needs to be like, we need to shake it out of our system. The trouble is there's a huge amount of marketing dollars behind it. So it's like, what do you do?
Sorry, just to add to that, I mean, that was kind of what Donuts Economics was trying to challenge as well, is that the traditional economic model is that things just grow infinitely, which is clearly untrue, and Donut Economics was an attempt to articulate why that isn't true. But yeah.
Great stuff, thank you for that. I think there was a question at the back.
Talking of streets that we talk about Abbey, Diner, in to art. Some do good too intensive. He's whoever you are, double as the behavior want to take. Somehow they get very efficient on Rachel Bombers Bursky business actions. Gets it on the bit.
So I think there are a couple of practical things we can do. One of them is to actually start measuring our usage, because it's hard to alter behavior if you don't know what you're doing. So I'd say that's the first step. And I think we'll see tools emerging with the Tech Carbon Estimator, which is kind of a sister project to the Tech Carbon Standard, which tries to do some really high level estimation, is going to be having an update soon based on, as part of the output of that research, which will let you kind of estimate some of your, you tell it what kind of query you've done, how many queries you make a day, and it'll come up with a very vague number that we probably need better calculations around. But so that's one part of it. I think the other part is having resources available for people to, for example, I bet if you did little bit of analysis around your organization, you would find a lot of people are doing really similar queries because we've got similar jobs. So by providing templates for people to kind of fill in and to help them build out well-designed prompts so they can get that answer straight away is probably a good first step.
Anything to add, Joanne? No.
So I've got a really possibly quite controversial hot take on this one. I actually think the AI bubble needs to burst. These services need to get a lot more expensive so people actually understand what they're consuming. Because the problem we have right now is a lot of these services are massively subsidized, to my point of $1 of revenue, $3 of cost. Like we're living in a heavily subsidized try before you buy, get everyone hooked on it and then ramp up the prices kind of approach, right? And I kind of want the prices to go up because then I think it drives people to kind of look for smarter ways of using the technology, more efficient infrastructure, lower cost infrastructure. So yeah, I kind of, as much as I don't want this to impact people's pensions, which unfortunately I think it will, I kind of want the bubble to kind of unwind, or at least the air to come out of it and people to see the reality. I think all the while we have lots of venture capital money flowing into this space, subsidizing it, I don't think people are really going to truly understand the true financial cost, let alone, because let's face it, the behavior is shifted by money. Some people's behavior will be shifted by the eco label I was describing earlier, but unfortunately most people's behavior will fundamentally be shifted by cost.
Okay. Any other questions, Hannah? It's probably the last question, I think.
Joanne, this is a question for you. It's very exciting for us to have you in this room as an actual practitioner of sustainable IT. So I have sort of 2 quick fire questions for you. What is one low-hanging fruit that you've identified, like a quick win that you think Bristol Waste is either doing or can do quite quickly? Because I think people always like to hear about quick wins. And what's a wicked problem that you've identified that, if you had a magic wand, you could just go, oh, let's sort this out? So low-hanging fruit, wicked problem.
Let me think. Let me start with the wicket problem to start with while I think about the low-hanging fruit one, because there's a few there. So the wicket problem for us at Bristol Waste is that we don't have control over all of our infrastructure or network. It's actually managed by BCC and third-party suppliers. So we are completely at the whim for the majority of what we're doing to them. And getting BCC IT on board to align with what we're trying to do is torturous. I'm not gonna lie, it really is torturous. So I think that's one of probably our biggest challenges right now is when you look at that, where can we get the control over the systems and directly influence or at least understand what it is? We are seeing for some of our main software suppliers that they are now starting to add sustainability and traceability within what they're providing. So it's going in that right direction. In terms of the low-hanging fruit for us at Bristol Waste, it is the IT reuse and being able to repurpose what we have and controlling the life cycle of those assets. So extending the life cycle. So instead of every 3 years doing renewal, some of the equipment we had in there has been 5 to 6 years. We're at a point where we have to do the refresh because we have issues with Win 10 cybersecurity and things, but we've pushed it and we've kept things in play for a longer period of time. So that's been one of our quickest wins, is how we've actually extended that life cycle for all of our existing assets. If I was going to add one more thing to that, the most exciting part for me in all of this right now is, as I mentioned, I have a young team. And because what my background is and the training I have available, I get to shape those up and coming tech leaders of tomorrow by getting it embedded to them at the very beginning of their careers. So they're going to be thinking about it. And that's the part that gets me really excited as I'm going forward, because it'll have a lasting impact as it goes on.
It's a really lovely, positive note to leave it on. A round of applause for our speakers. Thank you.